My name is Sonia Tellier, and I am the Assistant Superintendent of the school district, and I am working with the team, the working group that's looking at health concerns, which is going to be one of the key discussion points this evening. And so I'm going to start through with just some reminders that carry over from the first forum in case you did not have the opportunity to attend, and just to make that connection into tonight's discussion. I have a few slides that I'm going to share highlighting the process, and then really it's about the conversation and garnering questions and concerns from you as members of our community so that we can help to focus in our work and make sure that we're really asking the questions that need to be asked, both of experts in the field and of the research that's available to us as we understand where to take the process. So a reminder about the goal of our work. Our superintendent, Nancy Taylor, initially recommended to our school committee last April that we relocate the Falmouth High School football program and the field back to the Falmouth High School campus. So that's the genesis. That's really where our work started from, is that recommendation, which was unanimously approved by the school committee. So in moving forward, the initial conversation on the town meeting floor with Article 4 from November was to see if the town would vote to appropriate the sum of money needed for the proposed funding of the capital improvements. Included in that was the field project. An amendment was for us to consider both artificial turf and natural turf. So we're going to talk about turf options and the grass options and construction of both as part of tonight's conversation. And then voted by unanimous vote, a quorum being present. You can see that the town voted to include the option for grass and to give us, thankfully, the funds to really look more deeply into the project. And so that's what tonight is part of, looking more deeply into the project. So as I started to allude to in the introduction, we divided ourselves into 3 working groups. The first working group was the group that, I'm actually going to go from the bottom up in reverse, talked about community and really opened up the project at the first forum 2 weeks ago. Tonight we're going to talk about health. And the third and final of the 3 community forums is going to focus on the financial costs and the full range for both the synthetic and the natural turf options, as well as look more at the specific design that's being proposed structurally. So tonight we are going to be previewing our work on health. We're not going to be talking about any particular decisions that have been rendered, more so just the broad scope of what we're looking at in terms of considering health for our student athletes as well as our community at large on a number of levels. And so here you can see in talking about the health, we have a guiding question, an essential question. We really want to know what is the comparative benefit and risk analysis for our student athletes, both competing on natural or grass fields as well as on synthetic turf fields. And then our purpose statement, really where we're taking our work, is evaluating the impact on both types of fields, considering the health and welfare of our student athletes in 4 areas. The first is the type of fill that goes into the field, synthetic and organic. So it's one thing when we get into the conversations about grass and sod, and we're, I think, all sort of that common understanding of, you know, you have the seed and the maintenance and the care, and there's fertilizers and treatments. But I also want to talk about the specific construction of the synthetic to be able to make that informed comparison. Talk about the environmental factors for both, the injury recovery rate and intensity of impact for a variety of injury types. And that can be talking about concussions, it can be talking about ligament and bone injuries, and also one of the pieces that we've been talking about in our conversation is abrasions and the impact of recovery depending on what's happening on that surface, how it's been maintained. And then finally, the impact on player development and competitive opportunity. And part of the health committee, we have our varsity football coach, Eric Almeida, who unfortunately is not here tonight, as well as our varsity field hockey coach, Courtney Lima, and they've been helping to inform our discussion about that competitive opportunity piece and player development. And so we've been, just kind of taking that around and talking about our players as part of the conversation. So as I started to talk about the piece with grass, we know that if we have the solid base, we have the soil, we have that layer, then we layer in the seed and we treat that and we maintain it. But I also want to make sure, for comparison purposes, we have a brief conversation about the construction on the turf, which has the 3 layers. There's the base layer for support and cushioning, there's the plastic turf material itself, and then there's the infill. And it's the infill that our team has spent a lot of time talking about. Our last meeting, we had representatives from CDM Smith come in and help educate us as well about the 2 types. So we have our synthetic and our organics when we come to talk about the turf, and we're going to talk about that more here in a second. So from an article that our team has been looking at and that we've been talking more deeply about, there's 2 illustrations here. One, the top one, looking at what happens when you layer in the turf and then you fill in the construction, just to kind of illustrate, and then the base or the cushion layer would be underneath. And then you can see more broadly. One of the pieces in the second picture that it starts to get at is it starts to get at that under-structure drain. And we're not going to be talking a lot about the understructure drain tonight so much as the fill composite, because that's an area that our team is still investigating and looking to know more about. And we're kind of getting into that with the design element and talking about the structural piece. And so CDM Smith is coming back to educate our team again at our next meeting, which is February 15th. And they'll also be present at the community forum on March 1st. So that's just to sort of visually illustrate, and certainly I'm sure there's going to be questions as we go on. And we can come back to this. But really the piece I want to talk about here is getting back to that infill, the material that's sitting in between those synthetic grass fibers. Synthetic fills are what we commonly hear about. I think most commonly we hear a lot about the crumb rubber. And that is the recycled tires that have effectively been shred up and they're being used to fill in that space. And then encapsulated crumb rubber. And our team is still studying the materials with which the crumb rubber gets encapsulated or coated to understand what the impact of those is. But the idea, the concern about the crumb rubber is that it's been exposed as tires on the ground. It's been exposed to a range of chemicals, both in the composition of actually making the tire and then the exposure to environmental elements from traffic of being on the roads, being exposed to oil, exposed to other composites that are in roads and parking lots, certainly roads that have been treated like ours have with the salt and other chemicals. So the encapsulation is expected to then take the recycled product and coat it and break it down to try and protect the environmental exposure. And I think, commonly when we talk about the rubber material, we get into conversations and we hear about environmental factors and cancer-causing agents, and that's really what the encapsulation is targeted at, is trying to keep those chemicals limited and the exposure to skin or and airborne inhalants isolated. But then there's another piece that I didn't include up here on the synthetic side, but there's actually a product that's a virgin rubber. It's created especially for the infill and turf fields. It hasn't been exposed to the additional chemicals that go into the tires. It hasn't been exposed to environmental contaminants by being on our roads or any other exposures. So in terms of talking about the synthetic fills for the turf, our team has decided to explore, and I don't just mean the health team, I mean the broader Fields Task Force and Planning Committee, has decided that in terms of understanding and studying more deeply the types of turf, we're not even going to entertain at this point talking about the crumb rubber that's not encapsulated. Our baseline conversation is going to start with the encapsulated and then look to consider the virgin rubber or the non-chemically treated rubber. But then we're also having conversations about the organic fill. And I think, one of the first conversations we had, I'll speak for myself, I certainly felt excited to know that there were organic options, right? So we started to look at the most commonly available organic options: ground coconut husk, the outside shell, crumbled cork, and sand. But one of the things that we all know about organic products is that there's a decomposition rate, right? And that decomposition rate affects the rate at which you have to return and add fill and the rate at which you may either have to replace or repair the field because it gets pressed down in its decomposition. So we're still having conversations about the types of organic fill and which ones could be advantageous for us to pursue, both in the maintenance and cost timeline as well as availability. because that's another piece about the organic materials that, you know, we're trying to understand is how readily available they may or may not be. And in some cases, they may also carry their own environmental risks associated. So this is just a real quick summary sort of where our work is guiding us, because for many of us, our backgrounds are not in this area, and so we're really trying to educate each other and work with experts in our local community, as well as experts in the research community, and looking at published reports and trying to draw from that and make sure that we understand it in a specific context of Falmouth. So, I mean, our team is really going back and forth and really trying to connect with as broad of a community as we can to really make sure that we make an informed decision and we support our broader team in making an overall informed decision. So in terms of talking about the purpose statement at the outset, what we're looking to do is we're looking to categorize the benefits and risks in the 4 areas that we had talked about. Those 4 areas being the surface, what type of turf, what type of infill, the environment, the environmental factors, both of the materials within the turf or the chemicals or other materials with which we need to maintain grass, injury, impact, and recovery on both types. And we've also reached out to Dr. Greg Parkinson at Falmouth Pediatrics, and he's been helping to synthesize the literature in the medical field and inform the work. And player development and competitive opportunity, again, outreach on the medical side, and then also the conversation with our coaches, and their coaches coming back and talking about what their players have said, both you know, at a practice or a competition, or after stepping off, you know, a turf or a grass field, and what they're saying even anecdotally about the experience. So this is the framework in which we're working. Obviously, it's not going to be this short and condensed. This is just illustrative, but this is what we're trying to do: capture the benefits and then capture the risks in those 4 categories. So before I go any further, this is really the point at which that I would like to move towards hearing questions and concerns, because as we continue to work through the resources and materials we have and work with the experts in the field that we've been speaking with, we want you to guide us in terms of the questions and concerns that you would like investigated more closely. And then that is what we will be using to make the ultimate recommendation as a task force and planning committee. Yes.
Well, I just have a question. You've been mentioning making sure you cover the chemicals and fertilizers from the grass turf, but also I hope you'll be looking at chemicals that have to be put on the surfaces of the turf fields too, whether it's the organic or encapsulated, because they do have to be, they do have chemicals you have to use.
So just if I didn't hear the question was making sure that we're considering not only chemicals that are being used for the natural grass field, but also those that have to be used to maintain the synthetic turf fields. And so, you know, as part of the broader reach, you know, we're trying to make sure that we understand, you know, artificial turf still in certain times needs watering, right? So we're trying to understand where does that water go, what's the impact, you know, and understanding where we're zoned as well in that particular area. So I would say yes, we're attending to that. I can't give you a definitive, here's what we found just yet.
No, yeah, right.
Yep, but I appreciate that we have that same sort of thought pattern. Yeah, thank you. Other questions or concerns to which we really need to make sure we attend to make an informed decision? Yes.
I appreciate the deliberate way that you're approaching this. It's very good. It's a complicated subject, and it's going to be emotional in town meeting, I'm sure. Are you planning on your time scale to have a finished document that represents what you're going to present on town meeting floor, and to send it out in advance so that at the precinct meetings people can address any questions and concerns, and the town meeting members will all in advance have a copy of what you're going to present?
I know we're working towards developing our final proposal and getting closer with March 1st, but I'm going to defer to the superintendent in terms of the...
We would hope to have something that would be published before town meeting. Remember that we have to, our committee has to make a recommendation to the school committee, So that would have to be in writing, and then based on the school committee either agreeing with us and passing the proposal or not, that would determine what then is pushed out to the public. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Thanks for that clarification.
You're welcome.
To your point, sir, I'm Jamie McDonald, I'm on the committee here. I would hope, when this process gets to the next stage, that members of the committee would be at those committee meetings to answer any questions.
And so just the final step in that process is that the anticipated vote at school committee is currently scheduled for Tuesday, March 27th. So that would be when we would have that level of endorsement to then be able to prepare those materials and help that process. Yeah.
And the school committee may have changes or tweaks that they want us to make, which is why we would go through the school committee process and through sort of hearing before we could then push it out.
Well, I don't know exactly when the precinct meetings start. The town meeting's April 9th.
Right.
And I think that week that you just mentioned is when the precinct meetings
Start.
So you're tight.
I think you're right.
It's, you know your timing is tight. You recognize that at the
Yes,
end.
but we did work backwards too. We
Yeah,
worked
good.
backwards from town meeting and planned the committee meetings, the community forums, and all the preparation. We sort of used a backward design to do that.
And, you know, I have been just looking for information, although I would say in the first meeting of this group, some people were characterized as advocates for one side or the other. I would encourage you to be sure and have robust information on both sides so the decision kind of makes itself.
I think you're right, and I think that was the message from town meeting in November,
Yeah.
right? I think that was a very clear message, that the expectation of town meeting is that we do both. You're absolutely right.
And I think that's why it's important when we're presenting the process and really trying to evaluate the turf and the grass, you know, we're acknowledging that we're not, you know, clear experts in either one. And so it's been an exciting journey for us to collect the information on both sides and to be able to make that comparison, you know, side by side as we're presenting it. It's kind of exciting in that way, but I like research, I guess. Other questions and concerns? Other ideas on which you might want us to touch, or if you've had, you know, a particular experience in either type of material?
Well, someone's brought it to my attention, and I think it was mentioned here 10 minutes ago, that there are chemicals associated with both types of solutions. But there are also alternatives. For instance, on grass, there are the chemicals, and there's the footprint of using all that water and the other maintenance challenges that are different. But there are also organic solutions for dealing with grass. So please don't overlook that kind of thing. Leave yourself open to critique.
Thank you. And as I'm listening to you talk, and I'm sort of trying to think through the volumes of reading that my teammates and I have been doing, and you know, it's interesting to go through the process and look at exactly what you're saying, sort of the natural and organic, and we think of it, I think, sometimes in terms of the heightened cautions that people issue around the turf, but just around the grass. And we got into that conversation a little bit around the injury likelihood, and really what we're finding in the literature is that it's not really conclusive in terms of the concussion or the impact rating, but there are other, you know, concerns that we've been trying to study in terms of, you know, the abrasions, and a lot of that does come back to the environmental influences on the turf, regardless of the material, but in its own maintenance and upkeep.
Well, what you're saying is exactly what I've seen in my kind of an inch deep and a mile wide research. None of the recognized agencies responsible for safety will say it's safe. They also won't say it's not safe because there's not data. But I caution you, because we're a community of scientists and engineers, I would caution you about leaning too hard on encapsulation, because anyone that understands materials knows that glass and metal are the only two impervious barriers. And any other coating is just another kind of polymer. As you said, you did it very well when you said it slows the transmission of the offensive chemical insect.
And I think in understanding, you know, I've been fortunate to be able to reach out and talk to one of our members of the audience, to Jed Goldstone, and we were talking just about that and trying to get an understand. And one of the things that Jed walked me through on our recent phone conversation was the nature of the research, right, around this. And just what you're saying, it's really hard because we don't have the time to get to the definitive yes or no. And you really need clear parameters to dig in and have a yes or no, and you have to be very limited in what you look at. But all of the factors that we're trying to understand to get that level of yes or no about each material, we don't have the luxury of the time, and the research hasn't kept up to get there. So it's a very interesting space, you know, to be making a decision, and then you're looking for more definitive answers that you aren't there yet. But the other piece is that there's no clear, yes, this is a heightened risk, and this is the level of risk. And I can't even tell you the volumes of research and related literature that my teammates and I have been digging through. And not only that, but looking at position statements that other school districts, that our Department of Education and other state departments of health have issued around turf fields, just simply because of the volume of turf fields being constructed. Particularly in our region, trying to be sensitive to that. Because I think one of the other pieces, that we hear about is the risk of heat on the turf fields, and the materials heating up, obviously at a rate that certainly grass is warm to the touch, but doesn't heat like rubber absorbing the sun. And concerns around that, because certainly that environmental influence is much more intense if we were in the southern region of our country versus where we are, and really being attentive to the impact of that in August, right, when a lot of our high school sports are kicking off, or summer sports are concluding. That's a major time for us, and just really making sure we understand. And that's where the irrigation piece comes in, more so, and to help cool. But then, that goes to the drainage piece, which I know sets off a little bit structurally, but it gets into that environmental realm of really understanding if you're putting the water on the chemical, what's the impact on the encapsulation, what's the impact on the organic material. It's just a cycle. You've got the material, you lay the material, you treat it in whatever way you need to, chemical, water, decomposition or slowed rate, and you just have to monitor that. And that's what we're really trying to understand, I think, more so than just the impact of an individual material by itself, but the whole cycle that material goes through to make the best decision. Other questions or concerns? Yes?
Have we talked to other communities yet to see what the issues they have regarding the fields? We're bringing up stuff about chemicals and all that. Mm-hmm. There's tons of artificial turf fields in southern New England. Have we talked to anybody yet?
So that was one of the pieces that we started to go through with CDM at our last meeting and get a list of other schools, in particular public high schools. We're trying to understand who have it, because I think that when we start to look at colleges and universities who have more fields and have had them for longer, they've got some other options available to them depending on, sort of where they are divisionally. And so we're looking at some of the other area public high schools and being able to understand. And I think that not wanting to put Courtney on the spot, but she's been pointing us in the direction of some of the fields that the field hockey team has played on to have us start to reach out. And then another member of our health committee gave us the Shrewsbury report. So we've identified fields, and so that's one of our next steps in the investigation, is to try and figure out where they are in their process, was the maintenance, sort of as suggested, and really understand. So I can't tell you that we've actually gone out and visited those fields just yet, aside from our coaches and players, but it is on our list of ways that we want to understand. And if you have a recommendation of a particular one in your mind that you visited, I would love to know, and I'll make that connection.
I'm more than happy to. There's quite a few fields out there that I think we need to look at. And some of the concerns that I'm hearing, they don't have that many concerns with those fields. Maintenance, manpower, and all that. I really think we need to look at these fields, walk on their fields, talk to the people who are maintaining these fields, and get some real answers. We got one in Barnstable, we got one in Durfee, we got one in Mansfield,
Monomoy,
Nauset,
Marshfield, Sandwich.
Plymouth.
The
mean,
one I like is North
Those are all high
Smithfield.
schools. We can,
So, there's plenty of them out there. We can go see them. We'd be more than happy to talk to them.
yeah.
Thank you.
We have a list of 60 schools that have turf fields that I personally, I'm the athletic director, that have seen that we compete against. Sometimes in a league situation where we are competing with Barnstable, Monomoy, Sandwich frequently, and then sometimes just in a tournament situation. So coaches, players, as the athletic director, I've seen 60 to probably 100 overall. And our community is a little different. There's a little different concerns. But certainly I have contacts with, every athletic director in those schools. It's more the do than don't right now. And go ahead, we'll finish this discussion at one other point at some point.
And it's interesting because before we step on those fields, I think with our sort of lens in terms of how we're evaluating them, one of the biggest things I think for our whole task force and planning committee was we were exposed to the monofilm, the split film, had an opportunity to touch those and then hold bits of the infill. Because the other piece is, we're going out and we're stepping on the fields and we're asking questions, about how do the players, feel when they're playing on this, what's, sort of been your experience. But I think that taking those steps to kind of learn about the smaller details of it actually change the questions we ask. And so I think now being able to go out and be on those fields with that level of knowledge, it really helps us to have a really strong conversation. And so, there was a whole nother piece we learned last week just about the width of the padding that goes underneath the artificial turf if there's an organic infill. And just understanding that would change how we have conversations. So I appreciate where you're coming from, and I think we're ready now to have, those conversations and visits. So thank you. I appreciate that. Kathleen, you had a second point?
Well, just as we're comparing turf and grass, and clearly that was the mandate from town meeting, but as this subcommittee of our big group gets further into it, if you're comparing artificial turf to a designated, well-cared-for field maintained specifically for field hockey, soccer, football, that's quite different than the reality of what you face in high school, where they're overused, under-maintained, 3 or 4 teams are trying to use that field. In an ideal world, each sport would have their own designated grass field. And it might surprise you that many of the coaches would say, sure, but that's really not a practical option for most public high schools. So just as we get deeper into this, and you want to compare the benefits and risks and the pluses and minuses of artificial turf versus grass, realize when you say grass field in Falmouth, there's divots and worn spots, and this report is helpful that the town commissioned from Gale Associates, just talking about the overall condition of our grass fields. They're not in the condition we'd like to see them in.
And it's interesting because the rain in and of itself becomes another environmental influence. That was one of the other pieces that we've been studying. And so in the Gale report, which you're holding, which was commissioned within the town, and our team actually took a little bit of time, and we've shared the link, and we've watched the presentation of the Gale report to the Board of Selectmen. But just understanding the impact on that, and I think one of the takeaways for us was the rate of use. And so we kind of averaged it out across our readings that it's approximately 3 uses on the synthetic turf to 1 on the grass. And the grass tends to have a plus or minus variable depending on the length of the rainy season or things of that nature. So that was just another element in terms of looking at the environmental impact that I don't think our team came into this process with that awareness. Sorry, Ann, go ahead.
Just to reiterate what was
Kathleen.
just said about grass. Having been a parent in Falmouth, my children have been playing on those fields for about 19 years. The condition of the fields at a high school level is really, and I'm a therapist, so looking at, I would love to know how many injuries have occurred on those fields. The soccer field alone, which we play around the track, so many injuries have occurred there. The field hockey field and the lacrosse field is maintained privately by 2 parents that have tirelessly, effortlessly maintained that field. So I'm really concerned with the town not being able to sustain a great, we'll put all this money into a nice grass field, but having lived here and having my children playing on those fields, I'm embarrassed coming in, having an account come in and playing on those fields. So the safety of the children is a concern, and the care of the field.
And so to that point, I hear you. And we've also reached out to Tim Wakefield, who's our trainer. And so that actually gives us a really great way to have Tim participate in our work and maybe evaluate the injuries and kind of give us that level of quantifiable data. So thank you. And I think you've just given our team a lead. I see smiles and nods to reach back to Tim and try and find that data to inform our work as well. The other piece, to go back to the Gale report that we're sort of alluding to Kathleen's comments with, it looks at the whole town, and so there's a difference in the scope, right, of what's across the whole town and what's within the scope of this project or even of the district. But the two are kind of complementary, right? They're two projects running in parallel to each other, and this particular one certainly serving our student athletes, but definitely part of the larger sort of scope or vision of the town. Yes?
Although, I guess there's so many different sports that we played on, whichever kind of field it's going to be. Will that require extra maintenance on both? Even in synthetic turf field, if they're playing field hockey and lacrosse and football, is that going to impact that kind of field also?
Yeah, so the frequency of use is going to be tied to the
Kind of
maintenance.
use, frequency and...
Yeah, and then the kind, and so the kind is also tied. When you look at grass, it's kind of, right, there's, you put the seed down and there's a height at which you want to kind of cut it when you're maintaining it, right? With the turf, you don't get that luxury of kind of letting it grow and cutting it down, so there's also a middle level place where you have to determine the height, and when you determine the height, that's also an influence on the maintenance. So even though it might vary in the frequency with which it needs to sort of be groomed or maintained, it would still, regardless of the type of use, allow for more uses on the synthetic turf. That part we've been able to pretty definitively understand. But continuing to understand, the variation in terms of what length of fill would you want, given the range of sports. I think we've kind of talked about a middle ground, but we didn't make that definitive answer. Because again, to the point that you had raised earlier, and I'm sorry that I don't know your name, but looking at what those other fields have put down, how many different sports are using the other fields if we're going to go out and make visits, and what length they decided to ultimately settle on, and the competitive advantage there. So it's all kind of like woven into this broader conversation, but those are some of the nuanced pieces that we really do need to dig into. Thank you. I don't know if you wanted to ask a question or if you were just...
I'm just thinking I'll have
All right.
something to say. You can count on it.
Thank you.
I just want to say,
Karen.
to Erin Azada's point, in the Gale report. So yes, we're talking about all the fields in the Gale reports. That's our feeder program. Those are our youth that are going to be coming through our school system. So we still, obviously, Sandy Cooney can talk to this, I'm sure, the lack of fields that we have, we just don't have enough. And the report came out stating, how many fields do we need, Kathleen?
The 9 additional grass fields or 3 artificial fields using Sonia's formula of 3 times use. A minimum of 9 additional fields for current use, not new programs or expanded programs. And that was an impartial, most of us knew it, but they were able to quantify it.
Yeah.
I just have a question. This is the first time I've been to a meeting, but one of my greatest concerns as a mom of an athlete who's playing on these fields is the goose poop and them playing in it, rolling around in it, faces being smashed in it, yada, yada, yada. If certain people want a grass field, what are you going to do to try and deter those geese from coming to those fields so our students aren't playing in it?
Yeah.
So I have spent
We've talked about
$2,500 at T-Ticket School. So there's goose poop sticks that you can purchase. And I just talked to a person in Pennsylvania who pays $1,000 a month to have dogs come to his property and scare the geese off the school property. And they have a pond. So they have to swim in the pond to scare the geese off. But we have put in sticks, which have worked, but they've been vandalized.
Right.
They've been hit by the lawnmower. Our school was closed temporarily, so I'm down to 3. They did work, but I had 7, and I'm down to 3, and there's no money to replace them.
And I can't say that they work perfectly.
No.
And we've tried different things. I don't know if you saw at Morse Pond, he had metal coyotes and on the lawn, because that was a theory that it scared them away. And one time, Mr. McLaughlin goes out and the geese are walking around the fake coyotes.
Right.
So we've tried that. We have tried strobe lights at different elementary schools. And again, the budget is, finite. So like Gary alluded to, you can put all these things up, but they have to be replaced and you have to stay on top of it. So I can't say we've been totally successful at keeping the geese off the property, and it absolutely is a problem.
And the geese do adapt. They are, at first they
anything
were
we
afraid
try,
of the
and
coyotes.
territorial.
At first, they avoid the strobe light.
Yep.
But then the next wave comes in and they don't.
They don't
Geese-
work for long.
No, geese do not like artificial turf.
Right. And that's kind of, that's
Right,
kind
they
of
don't-
my point.
If they
I mean,
like, they don't stay.
I just want people who are either on one side or the other to realize that, we do have our children and we need to watch out for them. And I would prefer if my children weren't having their faces planted or whatever, or rolling around in goose feces. I mean, and let alone not just goose,
It's a
other
serious-
animals as well. And
It's a
they-
serious health concern, and
It's
it isn't
huge.
always on everybody's list. In our particular area, it's a very serious
Yeah.
occurrence.
It is on the list for the.
It's on our list.
For our list,
It is.
yeah, but not
We also
everyone
want
deals with it.
coyotes to our school because they're coming in to get the geese. We've had to bring the kids in from recess, keep there, because of coyotes. Because they're there to
Right.
get geese.
There's other animals.
And so when I alluded earlier to the injuries and saying that it's less conclusive in terms of the impact and going back to the abrasions and things that can get in and cause infection, this is part of the conversation. We had conversations about just bacteria in general on any surface. And then this is part of, within our smaller group, part of our conversation as well in terms of the health concerns. So we hear what you're saying, and we're trying to attune to that. And, as both our superintendent and one of our PE teachers both shared with you, we don't have a ready solution. I'm going to be available when we're done, but I just want to run through a couple other points by way of reminders and ways that you can continue to involve yourself in the process. And then if you have additional questions or concerns, like I said, I'll be down here to talk with you. Associated costs, so the third of our 3 working groups, they're going to be the primary presenters along with CDM Smith on the March 1st Community Forum. Same time, 5 p.m., same location here at Morse Pond. And then among reminders, this is published to our website, our page of the website as well. We have our community membership and district advisory, so you can see we have a pretty large group that's trying to attend to all of these pieces, and we give individual homework assignments as we go. Lots of hands to help us get it done. And our timeline for moving forward, so tonight we are in the middle of the table. Thursday, February 15th, just ahead of our winter break, our task force and planning committee convenes to meet again, and CDM Smith will be on hand to continue to talk to us. We did a lot of education last time around the synthetic, and now we're going to do a lot of conversation education around the influences with the natural turf, as well as looking at the project scope and some of the financial costs associated as they get ready for the forum. Task force presentation to the school committee on March 13th, sort of that public hearing that Superintendent Taylor started to talk about, with the vote that's anticipated for March 27th. And then, as we were talking about, town meeting is here for April 9th and or 10th, and then the precinct meetings in the middle of that, depending on what we have available for materials and how we can communicate that, and the roles of our many members to help us spread that word. And then we have 2 ways that you can continue to put your voice into this process, so that if you can't be at the last forum or you think of something between the forums, considering that they're spread by a month at this point. On the district's website, if you go to the main page, under the community tab, it says Fields Committee. We gave ourselves a short name on the website instead of the Task Force and Planning Committee, with the Fields Committee. And when you get there, there's a section called Community Voices. It functions like a survey form, but it's just a live form that's going to continue to run through the entire duration of the project. And it gives you a place to put questions and concerns that you'd like us to consider. You can share this link out on social media. We've shared it out on our social media. And it does, the only caveat here is it does require a name, so that if we need to understand what you're asking, or if we want to get back to you for a one-to-one conversation just to give you some insight as we're planning. We just want to know who you are so we can talk to you. And then also our community team, just by way of reminder, we're going to be launching this on social media and really circulating this link around. They've created a brief survey just to understand pretty readily what the community is asking for. And it's something that, you know, as the forums go on, this will be on, I think, through the next forum, right? So that we can continue to gather ideas as you collect information and sort of consider the process. And so I'm going to stay up here. We've had a lot of questions and concerns shared. I'm going to stay up here in case there's any others you want to share, but we thank you very much for coming out. Yes?
Just as a point of clarity on the timetable.
Sure.
I came tonight with the expectation that I'd hear something about health as it relates to the two kinds of fields, and I am not leaving with any more information than I brought with me in my head. On March 1st, will there be any information on a cost comparison? Or it feels more like you're planning to win rather than sharing information that's known?
In terms of the cost,
Well, in terms of all these elements, you want to know how to address objections as opposed to
Yeah.
sharing preliminary information so the community can get steeped in this knowledge.
so that
I
is
hope I'm not being too obtuse.
No, I understand
I'm trying to
what
be
you're
polite, but actually I'm not happy, actually.
I understand what you're saying, and that was what the comparison table was that I shared with you. So we've been collecting the information and reaching out to partners in the past couple of weeks. So that's what our team is doing between now and the next forum. I'm not sure that we are going to be, the health committee is going to be presenting outright, but we will be working to plot out all of the benefits and challenges for both surfaces so that we do have a tool that we can share that information with.
On March 1st, will the cost people come in with a blank chart like this, or will they actually have information?
No,
They-
you will have numbers
Yeah.
on March 1st.
For both turf and grass.
You will have numbers.
Well, that's fair then.
Yes, we'll have both.
So what happens is we start with the community where the community forum for the community working group to gather initial information insight around what the community would like. We've taken and filtered some of that. We've started to make a broad sweep, again, not being experts ourselves in the field, right, getting the baseline, and making sure that we're understanding the elements that our community wants us to understand, and then being able to present that back, both from the community perspective from their survey and our health study, in the lens of taking and breaking all those down and looking at the cost comparisons of those. So the whole project will come together in one sort of package as we get towards the end and really get a sense of where the recommendation is going.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I appreciate your honesty. Thank you. Yes.
Mark Fitterman from Precinct 6. Few things that I know about this and other things. As far as the geese are concerned, golf course settled a long time ago that the best and the most effective way is border collies. I mean, they just keep them in-house. They work quite well. Everything else ascends from there. But Gale Associates, and no offense to anybody here that works for Gale Associates, they're really not at the top of their field. But their recommendation that we need 3 to 9 fields, 3 turf fields or 9 grass fields, you know, I won't quibble with that. But I can say that we certainly can't afford 3 turf fields, period. And then on top of that, you're making these comparisons, and I want you to keep in mind that heretofore, we've never had a person qualified to maintain our fields, and it has never been done. So we're comparing what we're used to. We should be comparing this to what we deserve. Now, they are finally putting together a job description and attempting to hire someone that has turf maintenance. I can also tell you, being a landlord, I bought this Fenway Park grass. I mean, grasses are, they're growing all that, they're just, it's changing yearly. And I planted it in a rental that I have, and they had 3 kids, and the woman next door was about 33 kids. And as soon as this grass took, it really was incredibly durable. It surprised me. And as far as the injuries, My concern, and what I've been following for probably a decade now, isn't the knee injuries and the abrasions that everyone knows about. There's a certain cancer cluster that lies at the heart of all these turf fields, and that's young girls between like 8 and 14, 16, who play goalie. They dive down on the field in soccer and in field hockey, and you can watch the pros and you can see the infill plays up, and they're coming down with all kinds of cancer. And this was discovered at conventions of oncologists. They're just comparing notes in the bar or whatever. That's how it came about. And and you're saying that you're going through all this information that you have, and that's basically, if you pardon the pun, because the field is being flooded with all these studies by the industry. And they shop the bed and just fill you up with reports, what they want you to hear. And what goes on behind the scenes with this stuff, there's numerous class action lawsuits going against many of these turf manufacturers. I have an engineering background in static stress materials, and being in the north, all these organic infills are subject to freeze and thaw, and they break down in no time whatsoever, and they're not favorable. The Atlanta Falcons put in a field, they used it for about 25 minutes, and they tore the whole thing up. You know, I know everybody likes the idea of a turf field, but I don't see how we can afford it. We have 23 fields now? Is that the number? Somewhere in that neighborhood, we have a fair amount of fields.
I don't know.
We need more. For us to chase this field in one direction and not address the whole thing as seems to me like just a bad idea. I mean, I think it should be foregone conclusion that we need grass fields that are prepared properly. And as far as the heights of different things, if you schedule your games according to your mowing schedule, you know, I'm assuming that the lowest is field hockey. So you play the field hockey games on the fields after they were just mowed, and then you would move up accordingly.
But you know, you're not only thinking about the maintenance of the field. When you see a child play on a field that has divots and that has 3 inches of mud.
Oh, that's completely unacceptable.
So you're right. So, but you also, the cancer thing that you brought up is something really good to look at. Also, the financial impact on a child that's had a concussion, and the school is responsible for helping that child get through high school. You have to look at that financial impact too, because there's a lot.
I understand.
And Mr. Finneran, could I ask you to send us the references for the research that you have so that we can go on the links, or we can see the names of who's written the research so that we can add it to sort of
There's just
to our
stuff that I've read along the way in the last 10 years, and I read basically anything I can get a hold of.
I'll send it.
But
I'll
it
send
is,
it. It's
it is factual.
It's very old. It's very
Yeah.
old, and it's
Thank you.
spelled.
And-
If we can
and I
have
mean-
it, that would be great.
excuse me, what was your name, ma'am?
Aaron Zotto.
Yeah. Oh,
You know
hello,
me.
sorry.
You know her.
Yeah.
I think everybody does.
That's true, what you're saying, but again, we're comparing fields that have not been maintained properly. And there's other things that have been done to these fields over the years as far as
athletic
best
events take place in
Well, if we
training.
don't have the manpower to maintain
No,
these
but
fields,
What?
how are we,
I
let me just
think-
ask a question.
Hold on, Mr. Finneran.
If we don't have the manpower to maintain the
We
fields,
understand.
how are we
And
gonna
you
get the
make a
money
good
to buy
point.
this?
You make a really good point about grass fields and comparing what we have to what we should have. I think your point is well taken. Are there any other questions? I'll go back to you, and then we'll come to you. Okay? Go ahead.
Rich Bradley, Precinct 7. How many hours a year does that field going to be getting used, do you figure?
We have usage, we did fill out a table, let's see. Fall and spring, it would be at least 4, I can send you the table that tallies.
Do you know the
every-
total number of hours a year?
I don't, for one field, it would be used 4 hours a day, 20 to 30 hours per week 10 to 12 weeks in the fall. I'm just going by the high school usage. And then there'd be community usage outside of that. And then basically the same model in the spring. 20 to 30 hours during a normal week of athletic events with practices and games. Would take us from fall and spring, and then summer, they would be open to outside groups. So our use is not overuse.
Over 1,000 hours, you think?
I think so, and there was one of the tables we completed, usage. They give a weight to the type of usage. A football practice counts much more than a field hockey practice. So in addition to the number of hours they're on the field, it's also the impact on the field. A lot, 1,000 or more, certainly when you add in community use. And I'll be glad to tally that.
Is that CDM Smith going to give you
They gave us the form.
options of, so if you do a turf field, you'd need three grass fields. Are they going to give you that option?
Okay. That's what we should be comparing, actually. When you think it's expensive, the cost of
Because
one
to build a
turf
grass field,
field.
it's about, you could build 3 fields, not including the lights and all that other fancy stuff, but just the fields for about $1 million.
All right, and there's two things going on. CDM is the company that we're working with now. Gale Associates identified, did the demand use study. But when you're comparing the cost of a turf field versus the cost of a grass field, to get the same number of uses, you'd have to build 3 grass fields. And then they'd have to maintain them, which can be $30,000 to $35,000 a year to maintain a single grass field, if they have the people and the resources to actually do them.
I'd just like to address that. If you do go with this turf field, you're gonna spend the extra money, and on all the other 23 fields in this town, you're still gonna be short on the maintenance, and they're still gonna be in poor condition. I think the way to do is address all of the fields at once when you do this thinking.
It's an important part.
It really is,
Yeah.
yes.
So, I think some good points are being made here in the spirit of the intent, which I think this is a community forum for people to bring up concerns. And I appreciate all the points that have been expressed. And I think the press did a good job last time of reporting the results of the first meeting. It was very accurate and objective and complete. And so it's in that spirit that I want to offer 2 things to make sure it gets consolidated as we build our knowledge and the snowball gets bigger rolling forward. You know, being a science-based person, I have a big concern about safety, but I understand all of the reports I read say, we don't know if it's safe and we don't know if it's unsafe. And every report ends with, more study is needed, and frankly, if you have ever been involved in a field where carcinogenesis or mutagenesis or any kind of chemical interaction is a problem, you understand that everything is carcinogenic if you develop a test with the right dose. The response will be cancer at some point, and I don't know what that means because they use mice, and so this is very complicated. Salt is the only thing that's toxic, not carcinogenic. But everything else is carcinogenic. And so the thing that I'm concerned about is the other statement that's ambiguous and it strikes fear in my heart, and because there are many examples in the world today, it says effects like cancer, like what Mark has mentioned about goalies and people who play over a career, those are 30 to 50-year effects. And we can see effects in our embayments with nitrogen, in what they did at the base, the joint base, coming through our water. And it takes 100 years for the water to get from Sandwich to the bays. And so it's a long-term effect, and it's not an acute effect. But once it's there, it's really hard to change it. So this is just I trust our values as a community to do the best job we can of making a decision today. But frankly, everyone has not spoken and the final word is not in, as many people have said. And that's a risk. And especially I have to listen to people with kids because they're the ones who are putting their children at risk under the conditions of whatever turf and whatever the the grass represents. They each have their own, pluses and minuses. So that's that piece. And the other piece, I'm sorry I'm taking so much time. The other piece is, I was reminded by my colleagues on the Finance Committee the other night, as we were having this discussion, that the Finance Committee has approved and at the Selectmen's recommendation, $200,000 is put in for the maintenance of fields. And our question was, how are those going to be maintained? We don't have anyone to maintain fields. They're going to hire contractors. And I made this comment the last time, so at the risk of redundancy to anyone who's here, if we're going to have grass fields, and we are, even if we get one turf field, we need a responsible program to deliver something. I can understand people saying, I'm ashamed of this. It's basically grazing land where kids play ball. And there are changes structurally within the department that manages that, and there are changes financially in the budget that's allocated, and over the next 10 years, which Jennifer Petit does put money in the out years, there's a placeholder of $200,000, and it's probably not enough, but I think that the attention has been achieved by all of the people of Falmouth who use the fields and have suffered the insult of the quality or lack of quality. And so something is going to be developed and addressed. And last time my theme, and it continues to be, that I have a strong support for the schools. I believe in education. My kids are long gone from the public school system. And I want our schools to continue to be, in the upper quartile in the state of Massachusetts, which is in the top of the country in every respect. And so I guess the point of it is the schools, though, sometimes, and I think you'll understand what I'm saying, the personality of those who are really more vested in the schools than the others who simply pay their taxes and support the schools, the personality of the schools is, leave us alone, we know what we want and we're going to get it. And I'm encouraging the schools to be more partners and draw the community in, because we all have a common interest in educating our kids and having excellent facilities and excellent programs. And so, in the spirit of kind of footnoting what Mark said, if it turns out that it's kind of touch or go, I would really love to see grass as something that's considered not the high school grass field, but we have all these grass fields, and we need a responsible program to maintain them. Because one thing I haven't heard here is, if you consider the model that we're living today, there's no expert in town, and there's no resources put to all these grass fields, 3 dozen or whatever we have, that we have, except casually or once needed on emergency. Now, I have looked into the turf fields, and there's specialized equipment and specialized training and specialized people, not just once you spend whatever it's going to cost, $3 to $5 million, depending on whether there's a hot dog stand or whatever it is. But there's still that maintenance component, and we have not addressed that for grass fields. And so I would certainly hope that we look at it holistically when we do this comparison for grass and turf. And the fact that we're not doing it for turf has a strong footnote, but that we're starting to get our arms around it. And if grass is the choice, that we include it as a total program for the town. Probably some kind of benefits of scale to do all the fields at once. So I'm sorry.
Okay, I'm going to go over to Ms. Cooney, and then we'll come back to Mr. Finneran, and we'll wrap it up. And we'll be here. Go ahead.
I'm Sandra Cooney. I'm Precinct 2 member, town meeting member. I spent 30 years on the Recreation Committee. I will tell you, this is my step down year, but I'm planning to go back. Every single year we have toured the fields, and every single year we make a list, and we give the list to our DPW and to the town to go fix any emergency issues that need to be done. Now, the committee this year, they're up in arms about the condition of our fields, and everybody's aware of it. So we've been working with the town The town has put some money to start fixing these grass fields. My biggest concern is that another grass field doesn't address the needs of this town. That study that says we need 3 turf fields compared to 9 grass fields. If we just start with one, so that we can see how it works, and we know that we'll have at least 10 years. We know that we can get some financial help. So, I just want to give it a shot of one. It makes sense to start it at the high school so multi-sports can play on it. So, when we're gearing up and we're comparing the two, let's remember that a turf field is more than one sport for a longer period of time. And that's what this town needs. So thank you.
Mr. Finnan, wrap it up for us.
As far as Peter mentioned in the maintenance thing, I mean, necessity being the mother of invention, I think that the field hockey fathers and parents have demonstrated that they're capable of helping as being part of the maintenance on a volunteer basis to kind of backfill or infill if you prefer. And also, not to be argumentative, but Sandy, if we did go down your route, ultimately we would be required to have 10 turf fields to fill our needs. And there's absolutely no way on God's earth that we're going to get 10 fields.
Nobody said we would need 10 fields. We would need
Well,
9
we
grass
have-
fields, 3 turf fields.
All right, we're gonna wrap it up.
But the math says we need 10. If we have 23 now and we need 9 more, so 3
But that's-
3 to 1
but that's
ratio,
still-
that means a
but-
total
but-
of
But
10.
that's still better than
Okay,
36
folks,
fields.
let's
You're not gonna
refocus here. Would anyone like to make any other comments? Or do you have any other questions for us to continue to look into?
I think
Moving forward.
put some of these concerns to rest. It's important that we go visit these other fields.
I agree.
Talk to these people,
Yes.
what problems they have. Has there been any cancer clusters with field hockey or soccer? Get the real answers,
Right.
not hearsay from 10 years ago. Let's get the real answers. And I think it ought to be open to the public to go with you guys to look at these fields, because we all have different opinions. We all have fields that we know will work and not work. But if we're going to do it as a community, we should run a bus and we all go look at them together.
Could you leave your name and phone number with Sonia before you leave?
I sure can.
That would be great. Did you want to say something here before I wrap it up?
I just want to briefly address the cancer concerns. That was in Washington State that was brought up, and the Washington State, the department, I can't remember what their Department of Health in Washington State looked at that as a potential cancer cluster and determined, in fact, that of the soccer players, there were observed about 55 cancers, and they expected about 1,300 cancers. So in fact, it's actually a lower cancer rate than was expected. And it's something to pay attention to. One concern with epidemiology is that it really has to be a very big signal to be picked up. So just always keep your eyes open and brain active, but it's very easy for apparent patterns. Human brain is very good at looking for patterns, and you need to take it into the bigger picture. So there really is not, in a statistical sense, in this limited study at any rate, any cancer concern.
How can that possibly be? What you're saying, if you extrapolate it out all the way, it says that you're more healthy to play on one of these fields. And we all know that the rubber's filled with lead.
You're more
You said the
healthy to play soccer.
The expected number was supposed to be 1,300, and it was actually 55. For you to extrapolate that logic out, it means there's a health benefit from playing on crushed ground rubber?
There's a health benefit to playing soccer, is what it is. There's a health benefit to playing sports.
And you have much more expertise than I do.
So that would apply across the
Same.
field. so to speak.
So again, the offer
Still not
stand,
logical. We can go.
I'm going to stand, and I'll take
Just one quick
contacts.
point. You do understand why they use that crumb rubber and what the politics are behind that?
We're not looking
Huge
at
money
We're not
from the
looking at-
tire companies to
Yeah, we're
get
not-
rid of a
I'm not
product.
looking up.
Look up what tires contain.
But we're not gonna
It's a
use that.
petroleum-based product, it's got lead in it, it's not good.
It's not on our radar to use that.
So you're not interested in the safety net?
I'm not interested in using the chrome rubber.
Okay.
So the offer stands. I'll be here for any additional comments, but thank you again for joining us. Thank you.